Hello everyone and welcome to my guide on how to play a DPS class in Warhammer Online Age of Reckoning on the private server. So this is not going to be a class overview or class guide in any way, shape or form. This is a guide on how to play the archetype, how to play a damage dealing class and how to play it efficiently. So I will be going over a few things, such as positioning, gearing, how to optimize your builds, how to think around the specs, and things like that. There are some things that will greatly improve your gameplay overall in this game that is not dependent on what class you play. The thing that I will be starting with is your UI. So how your UI looks and its setup is actually quite important. Being able to see your targets, for example. Here you can see, I can clearly see where my target is. I can see its health points. And I can see what buffs and debuffs I have. You can also see buffs and debuffs on yourself if you have it set up correctly. Meaning that you know more than you did before. Knowing is half the victory. That means if you as a DPS class know that your rampage is up, for example, and you can see the duration above your head, that really helps. You know when you have immunities, when you have CCs, when the enemy has immunities, etc, etc, etc. So a good UI setup is very important as a DPS class. As any class, really. I would absolutely recommend VinyUI as a starter setup, and I will be linking a UI setup down at the comments below. So, positioning as well. You can't just... This goes for any class. Where you stand and where you do things is very important. You can't just, stand in front of everything and expect that nothing will happen to you. If you have the enemy front line here and you're just standing in front and getting wailed on, you're gonna take a fuck ton of damage. Same thing. If you're a tank, you don't need to stand in the middle of everything. As a healer, you need to stay way back, so your positioning is very important, and I will be going over that even more in depth. Also, some things that is really important when it comes to all classes is to use your entire kit. What I mean with that is don't just use your damage abilities. You need to use your detons, for example. In here, distracting RoR. You need to use your snare breaks. You need to use your whatever defensive capabilities your class has. You really should be using them. You shouldn't just discard them and say, I'll let my tanks or my healers do the job. That is not good enough if you want to perform or if you want to up your gameplay. So, as a DPS, there are a few different options you have. You can play as a melee DPS or as a ranged DPS. As a melee DPS and a ranged DPS, you have the option of going single target or AoE, depending on what you will be doing with the class. This is a Slayer. It is a melee DPS class, and at the moment I am spec for AoE, meaning that I will be doing my damage around me, in front of me, and on the sides, and depending on what abilities I use. You have, as an AoE class, you have a few different types of AoE. You have the conal ones, which go in a cone in front. You have the area ones, which happen all around you. And you have the ones that go in like an arc around you. So that's the same for all melee classes. You also have, for example, Inevitable Doom, which I put on a target, and it will continue doing damage around that target. So this is a circle. So knowing how and where your damage is applied is very, very important as well. Single target spec, meaning you go into a character tree that is more focused on single target abilities. That is mainly used in smaller scale combat. So if you are going for an open RVR spec, you will more likely be AoE than single target. The job of an AoE DPS is to fight the masses in general. If you can get a single target kill, absolutely. You should be assisting on whoever is calling the targets, be it you or someone else. Assisting and playing together with other DPS is extremely important. So you really should set up a macro for that. And I will be making a link to that as well at the bottom, to where you can set up an assist. So just clicking a button, you can assist whoever you choose to assist. As a DPS character, you have to be aggressive and thirsty. Your job is to kill the enemy, but you cannot be too greedy. You have to know when to retreat. If you're going for a kill on a target, and you see that you start being really pressured, you see their melee DPS coming towards you, the best you can do in that situation is just root break and get out. Try to get out, even if the person lives. Like, you dying and not getting a kill may actually end up costing your team to wipe, because then they may stop and try to rescue, and then they die because the enemy team comes and kills them. So knowing when to withdraw and to stop taking damage is extremely important. You cannot be too greedy, especially if you play a ranged single target like a Bright Wizard, for example. You will be stuck channeling a lot, channeling and casting, because your abilities have cast time. So if you stand there and you cast a Pyroclastic Surge, for example, and you see the enemy players coming towards you, you need to interrupt. You need to stop whatever you're doing. And that can be done by jumping or by moving for some abilities. Then you have channels like Retribution here, where it continuously channels. I can move well, so I have to jump to abort it, or use another ability to get out. And that's where we come back to using your kit, meaning use your snare breaks. Use your, detaunt, get out. If you have flee, use that. If you have charge, use that. Being able to escape can save your team. If I can stand way back here while my tanks are cross-guarding and my healers are, cross-healing to get the tanks out, if I was in there trying to deal damage while that happened, that would put way too much pressure on them. So knowing when to back the fuck out and be defensive is very, very important. When it comes to dealing damage itself, if we go by open RVR standards, where you are trying to kill, let's say these 4 target dummies is the enemy team, I can stand back here and deal damage to them, but they will be, if they are heading in my direction, really where I should be is here. I can still hit all 3 of them. So you don't need to be in front. So the analogy I'm going to use here is stand outside and piss in. Don't stand inside and piss out. Like, don't stand in front of it and just get fucking pissed on. Stay on the sides, mind your positioning, think, where are they going? If I stand here, will they be completely shredding me? And again, detaunt. Detaunt is your best friend. Detaunt you will take 50% damage as long as you do not attack your detaunted target. Meaning that if you detaunt and run away, you will take 50% damage as you're running away, which is incredibly strong. And same thing with, if you are a ranged DPS, range on your abilities varying between 80 feet and 150 feet. Meaning that you should try to stay at max range. And on top of trying to stay at max range, you can hide inside a griffin, for example. From here, I can still throw axes. and I may not be seen. You can hide in a bush. You could hide behind, you could stand just behind something and get your darts out and then damage and burst and kill. You can, by positioning correctly, you can make your life so much easier. But when it comes to actually dealing the damage itself, a lot of it is about what am I attacking. So your damage is based on your main stat, which in my case is strength. That goes against their armor and their parry and block, and then against toughness. So my main stat, strength, and the scaling of the abilities versus all of those stats is what decides the final damage. So if I attack this target dummy, which has stats that are not that high, I hit for, a bit, 1104. But if I hit this guy, I will be hitting for less. So that means he has more mitigation. So choosing a target that will not take as much damage, that will take more damage, is the way to go. So you want to kill the squishiest target possible. So if you're a bright wizard, for example, you will want to kill the target, like a DPS that is unguarded, say a Choppa that is in full swing, like he's in red, and he takes less resistances. That's the target you want to go for. You really don't want to attack a tank because they can block, parry, dodge, disrupt. Same thing with a DPS. There are some mechanics to bypass that stuff, but as a rule of thumb, do not attack the tanks unless necessary. Slayer has Numbing Strike, for example, where you can debuff, block, and parry. That's a really good thing to do to a tank. There are some things where you should attack the tank, but you only want to attack the tanks when everything else is dead. So you go for the healers or the DPS first, depending on what group setup, what you're fighting, etc, etc. But when you are going for the healers, for example, there are two different types of immunities in this game. You have snare immunity, which is so if you root someone, for example, or pump them, that will give one type of immunity. And then you have a harder CC immunity, which is granted by silences, knockdowns, disarms. They all go on the same immunity. So this is one of the reasons why Buffet is so important. Where if I knock this guy down now, bap, you will see this 30-second counter, which means that for 30 seconds, this guy cannot be knocked down. So if I am going to attack this target and I want him dead, I cannot use any CC, meaning he is likely to escape. So if I knock down again, nothing happens, you see. So he, she, or it, or whatever, has a chance to escape because we cannot get the hard CC. So if you're a Bright Wizard, for example, throwing out your AoE silence, which is the choking smoke, will give immunities to all the targets in the vicinity of where you're silencing. So being smart about where you silence and when you use CC is very, very important. If you are using choking smoke in the front line with a melee DPS, that does nothing except giving them, free immunities, which is really bad for you and your team. That is directly harmful and will ruin your chances of winning. So that sort of ties into the target choosing. So when you're choosing a target for, say, choking smoke, now an AoE silence around the target. If my target here is where the front line is, and you're fighting the front line, and you are a melee DPS, like you're an AoE bomb Bright Wizard, you will be standing roughly here, and you will be channeling on them and stuff. And then you can target a target over here, drop the silence on that target where the heal line is, and then go back and beating the melee lineup. Meaning that you have efficiently shut down the heal line giving your team and yourself a chance to kill the melee DPS. So it's the same thing. A lot of the DPS have, for example, no escape, which is an AoE snare. So what that does is it means they cannot move as fast as they should. Meaning, if you manage to snare them, then they will be staying in your AoE damage for longer. So it is a very good way. CC, snares, roots, all of that is a very good way to to increase your chances of getting a kill. Then you have certain things like, I'm gonna use the Bright Wizard again. Bright Wizard has an AoE knockback called Backdraft, meaning that everything around you in an AoE gets knocked back a medium distance. That goes on an immunity, the snare CC, the snare immunity. So, meaning that the target cannot be rooted or punted. So if you do that, that means if you do that in the wrong place, in the front line, for example, that means we may not be able to punt the tanks, which is to knock back the tanks when we need to kill them to get them out of guard range. That's another thing you will be able to see if you get the proper UI. If the target has guard, a guarded target takes 50% less damage. So when choosing the target to deal damage to, you will want to avoid as much as possible dealing damage to a target with the guard icon. I don't have a good example of it here, but yes. So you will be able to see buffs and things as well. So being able to pick a target efficiently through knowledge is really one of the most important things as a DPS player. Then we come into gearing. Gearing and DPS is dependent on what class you play. So a Shadow Warrior main stat is Ballistic Skill, same with the Engineer. Then you have the Bright Wizard, which is an Intelligence main stat character. And then you have Slayer, you have White Lion, and Witch Hunter, which are Strength. So those are just the order ones. On Destro, you have the Sorceress and the Magus. Those are Intelligence main stat. And then you have the Squig Herder, which is it's sort of a hybrid, but it's a Ballistic Skill main stat. And then you have the Witch Elf, you have the Choppa and the Marauder, which are Strength main stat. So that's your main stats, which will scale your abilities. But then you see, my weapon skill is 649. Because my character doesn't have any way to bypass armor. Because as I mentioned earlier, it's your main stat and your abilities versus their armor and toughness. That's what decides the damage. So this character, the Slayer, needs penetration, armor penetration, which you can see on the side. I can do a .get stats, and this will show it clearly. Here you can see the weapon skill and the penetration, 46%. So that will help my damage. So when I'm gearing this character, the things I need to keep in mind is my wounds, which is my hit points. That is a very important stat. My strength and my weapon skill. Those are these two, strength and weapon skill, control my damage. Wounds is my HP. And then you have a stat here called initiative. Initiative decides your chance to be crit. So a critical hit is something you can scale as well, which goes on the melee critical hit bonus. It deals, I may be wrong, but I think it's 25. A critical hit deals by default 22.5% extra damage. That could be wrong, so if I'm incorrect in that, please type it down in the comments. Some characters have crit damage modifiers, which makes this even more valuable. But all in all, you want the main stat. But my critical hit bonus is controlled by this reduced. So when you attack a target, if I have 29% critical hit bonus, and I attack a target which has reduced critical chance bonus, which is the stat that goes under initiative. So this has chance to be critically hit 0. but it's more than that. I'm actually negative, like, I think it would be 14. So if someone with 14% crit chance would attack me now, they would have about 0% chance to critically hit me. So reduce crit chance is a direct counter to the crit chance of the attacker. Meaning this initiative, you will want to keep around 300 and then stack reduced critical chance, which you can do through your renown training. And renown is what you gain here. You gain renown rank and you gain renown. So you have futile strikes. As a DPS character, this is probably your most important investment. On most of my characters, I go 3, but usually I go 4 futile strikes. Meaning you have minus 24%. You gain... The enemy is 24% less likely to critically hit you. And then you have melee critical chance. This is for this character that I'm playing now. You have range critical, you have magic critical. Same thing, you have strength, weapon skill, but you can, through renown, you can increase your stats. And then you have the gearing in itself. So you have, for example, I have the Sovereign set, and I have +2 to Skaven Slayer. The bonuses are set with... so when you decide what gear you're going to do, you need to know what main stat you're going to be. Is it going to be strength? Is it going to be... You can even choose to play very defensive and scale toughness. That's up to you. But you need to know what bonuses do I want? What am I looking for? Because you can mix and match sets. You are not locked into using, say, you don't need to go for 8 Sovereign. You can do... for example, I can switch now and I can go 4 Vanquisher, 4-piece Sovereign. Or I can do what I did before, 3-piece Sentinel and 5-piece Sovereign. There we go. You cannot switch mid-combat. Same thing with the rings, and then you have the Genesis, which is another set bonus. When it comes to melee DPS specifically, well, it's the same with the Squeaky Herder and Shadow Warrior. You have auto attacks. Your weapons will have speed, so 3.2, 2.4, and you have a DPS number. So that controls how fast you auto attack. There are some characters who have auto attack speed builds, those can be very good as well. But when it comes to just the gearing in itself, you can mix and match, find out what your main stat is and think. So for example, in my setup, I chose, for this build that I'm going, I chose to do +2 to Skaven Slayer, because I wanted to do Inevitable Doom, Shadow Limbs, and No Escape. So this is the main skills in my build, and then I have Heal Debuff, Rampage, and then I go Power Through and Short Temper. So to get all those, I needed the +6. So 6-piece bonus, which is +2 to Path of Skaven Slayer abilities. So I get 2 extra points here, and I can put that there. So that makes... This is what I chose for my build. For the build I'm doing right now. You can swap and change your builds as much as you desire. But when it comes to choosing to gearing as a DPS character, you cannot only do damage and expect to be successful. You need to do the defensive stuff as well. You need your wounds. You need your parry, for example, and dodge. If you can get those stats up without investing too much, that is a very good thing. Also, you have potions that will help you a lot. Use those in combat, and that also goes back to using your entire kit. If you are being super pressured and you feel like you are not getting enough heals, break loose, use your potions. You have one that is these two, the Draft of Soothing and the Triumphant one. So one you can buy with the War Crest and one you can buy with regular, and then you have an Absorb. These 3 can all be used on a separate cooldown. So chug those 3 and run away. Because when you stay and take damage, you are just putting more pressure on your team. Relieve your team, get your team stable, and then you can go in and do damage again. So be smart about it. Think. And I will be adding one more thing, which to me is by far the most important thing as a DPS character, as a tank character, and as a healer character, as any character in this game, is using your microphone. If you are being heavily pressured, say something. If you are being knocked down, punted, CC'd, just make sure that you speak to your team. That goes for the tanks and healers as well. If you are attacked while you're running by a witch elf and your team just runs away, talk to them, let them know what's happening. Communication is the key to victory. So to summarize, the most important things, in my opinion, as a DPS, is knowledge. And that comes through getting a good UI where you can see what is going on and happening around you. Buffhead is very, very good. And cleaning up your UI. Don't have a mess. Make sure you can get your information out. Secondly, think when you choose. Don't just mindlessly spam one button. I mean, you can if you want to, but don't expect the results you want. If you want to be good, if you want to be more effective than you maybe are right now, think. Stay on the side, stay in front, but use your kit and think about what's happening. Don't just stand there and mindlessly do the same thing over and over. And then being vocal. Let your team know, talk to your team, and when it comes to certain things, try to be as clear as possible. So if you guys have any thoughts, please put them down in the comments below. I will be making a video for tank and healer as well. So thank you guys for watching, and please follow and subscribe or whatever, hit the bell. I don't know what you do with your life, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.